Ever heard that story about Putin? Cornering a rat as a kid?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
Like out of a movie.
Right. But it says a lot about him.
And that's kind of the point of this whole deep dive, right? Trying to understand this guy, Vladimir Putin.
Absolutely. You can't really grasp his actions on the world stage without, well, going back to the beginning.
So, communal apartment in Leningrad, tough childhood. What kind of impact does that have on a person?
It's huge. Think about it. Post-war Leningrad, multiple families crammed together. It creates this constant sense of competition for resources. You're always having to fight for your share.
And that really comes across in descriptions of him as a kid, like always getting in scraps. Scrappy.
Yeah, very much so. His friends from back then, they talk about him as this tough little guy, always ready to throw down.
There's even that quote, isn't there? If a fight's inevitable, you have to hit first.
Yeah, that's pure Putin right there. And it's scary how much that's played out in his political career.
Okay, so you've got this kid, shaped by hardship, and then he goes and joins the KGB. I mean, what does that tell you?
Well, it's the 70s, Cold War in full swing. The KGB, they were the elite, shrouded in this mystique.
Like James Bond stuff.
Maybe a bit, but for someone like Putin, it probably represented power, patriotism, a chance to serve his country.
But then the Berlin Wall falls. He's stationed in Dresden, East Germany, when it all happens. It's been a huge shock.
Imagine that. The whole world you believe in just collapses around you. And what does he do? He reaches out to Moscow for instructions, support, and nothing. Silent.
Whoa, abandoned by the very system he's dedicated himself to.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a defining moment for him. It plants the seeds for this deep distrust of the West, this sense that Russia has to rely on itself, that it can't trust anyone else.
So he goes back to Russia. And it's not exactly a hero's welcome. The country's in shambles.
The 90s in Russia were wild. Economic chaos, crime, oligarchs running the show, not exactly a recipe for stability.
The perfect environment for someone like Putin, though.
Right.
Someone who thrives on, I don't know, exploiting chaos.
It's his element. He navigates this world, rising through the ranks under Yeltsin, always operating strategically, never quite in the spotlight, but gaining influence.
And then come those apartment bombings in 1999. Horrific. Hundreds dead.
And it's a turning point. Putin, the former KGB officer, steps up as the strongman.
Blaming Chechen separatists, promising to wipe them out, using some pretty chilling language.
Remember, even in the toilet.
Yeah, like, there's nothing to him. And people, they're scared. They want security. So his popularity, it just shoots up.
Right place, right time. Or maybe not so much right place, but you know what I mean.
And then, just like that, New Year's Eve, 1999, Yeltsin resigns, appoints Putin as acting president. Talk about a power move.
It was brilliant, really. Yeltsin was weak, unpopular. Putin is presented as the savior, the one to bring back order.
And he doesn't waste any time. Takes control of the media, sidelines rivals, centralizes power.
He understands that to control Russia, you have to control the narrative. And he's ruthless about it. No room for dissent.
So basically sets the stage for everything that comes after.
Oh yeah, this is just the prologue. Wait till we get to his rise on the global stage.
All that and more after the break.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about Putin consolidating power back in Russia.
Setting the stage for, well, everything that comes after. But it seems like this idea of Russia being wronged, like it lost something it deserved, that really becomes central to how he acts on the world stage, right?
Absolutely. It's like this driving force behind almost everything he does. That sense that Russia was humiliated after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that it needs to regain its rightful place.
And that's why he hates NATO expansion so much.
Big time. Sees it as this encroachment, like the West is trying to box Russia in, which, from his perspective, is a continuation of the wrongs done to Russia in the past.
So it's not just about territory. It's almost like this, I don't know, this wounded pride, this need to prove that Russia's still a major power.
Exactly. He's obsessed with restoring Russia's image, its influence on the world stage, and he's not afraid to use any means necessary to achieve that.
Which brings us to his playbook, how he actually goes about asserting Russian power. And it's not just about tanks and missiles, right?
Not at all. Putin's a master of what we call hybrid warfare.
Hybrid warfare.
Yeah, it's this blend of, well, everything. Military force, sure, but also economic pressure, cyber attacks, propaganda, disinformation.
So basically anything that creates chaos and undermines your opponents without having to go to full-scale war.
You got it. It's about sowing discord, exploiting weaknesses, keeping your enemies off balance, and it's been incredibly effective.
Like with Crimea back in 2014.
Classic example. He took advantage of the turmoil in Ukraine, used a combination of covert ops and this very well-crafted propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, Russia's annexed the whole peninsula.
And then there's the whole situation in eastern Ukraine, which is, well, still going on. This weird, shadowy war with pro-Russian separatists.
Who are, of course, backed by Russia. It's a way for him to destabilize Ukraine, chip away at its territory, but without technically having to commit to a full-blown invasion.
So he gets to maintain plausible deniability.
Always. But this hybrid warfare stuff, it's not just happening in Russia's backyard.
You're talking about the election interference, the disinformation campaigns online.
All of that. It's this global effort to weaken the West, to sow division within democratic societies. And it's happening on a scale we've never really seen before.
It's like he's playing this long game.
Yeah.
A really high-stakes game of chess, moving his pieces all over the board, always thinking a few steps ahead.
He's a brilliant strategist, there's no denying that. But the big question, the one that keeps everyone up at night, is what's his endgame? What does he ultimately want?
Is it like restoring the Soviet Empire, rebuilding that sphere of influence, or is it something even bigger?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, no one really knows for sure. Some people think it's about ideology, that he genuinely sees himself as fighting against the West, against liberal democracy itself.
It's a scary thought. I mean, how do you even begin to deal with a leader who sees the world as this zero-sum game where any concession is a sign of weakness?
It's a challenge, that's for sure. We've seen sanctions, diplomacy, attempts at appeasement. Nothing seems to really work.
Because he's playing by a different set of rules. He doesn't care about the same things that Western leaders do.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so dangerous. He's unpredictable, he's ruthless, and he's willing to take risks that most other leaders wouldn't even consider.
So are we just stuck in this cycle of confrontation, like a new Cold War with no end in sight?
Well, we have to hope not. But it's going to take some serious effort to find a way to coexist with someone like Putin.
And it's not just about governments and diplomats. It's about people on both sides understanding each other better, breaking down these barriers of suspicion and mistrust.
Right. Because ultimately, peace and stability are only going to come from dialogue, from finding common ground, even when it seems like there's none to be found.
Okay, so we've talked about Putin's rise to power, his worldview, how he operates on the world stage. But what about the people living in Russia? What's it actually like to live under his rule?
That's the question we're going to tackle next. Because, it's easy to get caught up in the geopolitics, but at the end of the day, there are millions of people whose lives are directly affected by Putin's decisions, and their stories are just as important.
We've spent a lot of time in this deep dive trying to understand Putin, Ray. The guy on the world stage, all the power moves, the global ambitions.
But we can't forget about the people who actually live in Russia.
Exactly. I mean, what's it actually like to be a Russian citizen under Putin? Because when he first took over, things were pretty rough.
Oh yeah, the 90s were a mess. The economy was in free fall. Oligarchs were basically running the country.
And Putin, he kind of came in as this, strongman figure who's going to fix it all.
And to be fair, he did bring some stability, crack down on the oligarchs. The economy started to recover, mostly thanks to high oil prices.
So for a lot of Russians, things actually did get better, at least for a while.
Right, and that's important to remember. But there's always a but with Putin, isn't there?
Because those improvements came at a price. Like, what about all the stuff we talked about earlier? The crushing of dissent, the control of the media?
It's a trade-off. He brought stability, but he took away freedom. Built this system where loyalty is everything, and if you step out of line, you get punished.
So it's almost like this facade, this image of prosperity, but underneath it's all corruption and fear.
Yeah, kinda. And that kind of system where all the powers concentrate at the top, it just doesn't work in the long run. It stifles creativity, innovation, ultimately holds the whole country back.
And then there's the war in Ukraine. I mean, those sanctions from the West, they've got to be hurting, right?
Big time. The ruble's tanked. Prices are through the roof. Ordinary Russians are feeling the pinch.
It's like the very thing he was trying to do, restore Russia's greatness, it's backfiring, isolating the country, hurting the economy, hurting the people he's supposed to be protecting.
Yeah, it's a pretty tragic situation, and it makes you wonder, how long can this last?
He's not getting any younger, and there's no clear successor. What happens when Putin's gone?
That's the big question, isn't it? Nobody really knows. It could be a peaceful transition, Or it could be total chaos, power struggles, factions vying for control.
Especially with, all those nukes. It's a little unnerving to think about.
It's a reminder that this whole system, it's built around one man. And when he's gone, who knows what happens.
Okay, so big picture, where does Russia go from here?
I wish I had a crystal ball. But honestly, it's a crossroads. They can
Right.
keep going down this path. Isolation, authoritarianism, conflict. Or they can try to change course. Embrace democracy, rule of law, human rights.
And that's a decision that ultimately only the Russian people can make.
Exactly. It's their country, their future.
Well, that's about it for our deep dive on Vladimir Putin.
From those Leningrad streets to the Kremlin, it's been a wild ride.
We've covered a lot of ground here. His past, his rise to power, how he operates.
And the impact it's all having, not just on Russia, but on the world.
It's a complicated story, no easy answers, but hopefully by understanding Putin a little better, we can, be a little more prepared for what comes next.
Thanks for listening.